Welcome back to the Lords of Lore podcast. I'm Matt,
I'm Luca.
I'm Will.
and this is the podcast for all things fantasy and sci-fi nerddom. And today we are going to be looking at the controversial topic of that was last week, MacGuffins. Today we're going to be looking at the controversial topic of anti-heroes and villain protagonists and all things in between or otherwise. Also look out for this Friday. The first episode of Unabashed will be dropping. You would have seen last Friday, we released our first episode of Ruminations, where Luca and I discussed the book actually in your background right now, Rage of Dragons, which was mostly just us gushing for like an hour and a half about how much we love this book. So if you want to see that, check it out. It's live on our YouTube channel now, and anywhere you might listen to this podcast. We're going to get to that main topic of anti-heroes after we get into Luca's Litany of Literature, wherein Luca has the podcast within the podcast and talks about some fantasy goings-on of his week. And then we'll get into my Monster of the Week and Matt's Monster Musings and wrap it all up with Will's Wondrous Wisdom, where Will brings us some real-world examples or origins of the topic we're discussing at the end of the show. So without any further ado, Luca, what's been going on this week?
Guys, I finished Midnight Tides. Thank you.
It's the fifth book in the Molasses series?
Yep, fifth book in Molasses.
Mayonnaise.
And I have some mid-series thoughts.
Ooh, mid-Molasses series stuff.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Like, Midnight Tides is actually, like, upon finishing it, maybe my third favorite book in the series as of now.
This journey we've gone on with you.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago, I was like, screw these books that do time jumps. But no, it was actually really, really good. Like, I can't wait to see all these characters in the later books, because I know they'll show up again in like book 7 or 8. But now with book 6, we're back to the squad we followed in book 2 and 4, which is like nice to be back on the continent of 7 cities.
Oh wow!
But I do have one. I found one problem with the series.
Okay.
And if the series wasn't so good, it would be a pretty big issue for me. And that is, there's no official map for the world of Malazan.
That's tough.
Yeah.
That's I feel like every time you bring something in this segment, I'm like, oh man, I don't know about that. That's the deal breaker. And a map is for me. Okay, so I read recently the Raven Shadow trilogy and then the Raven's Blade series, which is all part of the same story and universe by Anthony Ryan. Really good stuff. And he draws his own maps. And they're not very detailed, but it's enough where you can go, okay, those people are from the South, and I could see why people from here would invade there or whatever the case may be. And yeah, it's sort of just like to get, we're traveling to this place, so I know what that means and where you have to pass and why that's significant, all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Which really, like, I would be listening to the book and I would have the map open in a separate tab while I was like working or whatever I was doing, painting or whatever, and just be like, oh, okay, like sort of like it's interactive. And anything I read, like I even tried to find a map of like Rage of Dragons and Fires of Vengeance, and there isn't one. But yeah, I mean, I'm okay.
I mean, there's the map of the peninsula. It's in the book.
Okay.
I was even gonna say like the Rage of Dragons has like a really minimal map. There's like no real detail, and there's only the peninsula they're on. But like that's enough, like to just satisfy my need to like see visually the geography the characters are in. But the thing about, like, I don't have the physical Malazan books. I've been listening to the audiobooks. But I've been like looking it up, especially since now we've seen 3 different continents of this world. And like in each book, there's like major army movements that we're tracking. And they're all described like, oh, they're going, I don't know, like 300 leagues south of this city, or like the army's moving along this coast and sees this bay and whatnot. Like there's a lot of like explanation of where these like major movements are happening, and they're really important to the story, even in terms of timeline. And then there's just no official map. Like there's like maps people have drawn based on like all the descriptions from the books, and they're like really good, but I realize there's no official like author drawn or author approved map, and it really disappointed me just because specifically for this world with all these different continents and like how they're interacting, it's like it'd be so interesting to see like what the official world looked like. But I mean, it's okay.
Will, how do you feel about maps in fantasy or in literature
in general?
Yeah. Yeah, what do you think about maps?
How do you feel about cartography, Will?
I mean, personally, like I don't need them just because I'm built different and I have
fuck
I have like a perfect sense of direction. No, actually,
we're just children, so you're superior to us. That's all.
Yeah. So for fiction, I've been reading like this series by Simon Scarrow. I think I mentioned it before. I haven't read it like the book in a while, like in the past few days. But one thing that they included was definitely maps. And they also included like because since it's like based on like the Roman legions and stuff, they actually like on top of the maps they also like included like more information regarding like different like formations and stuff like that, where they would stand on a field, and like all these like additional other maps as well. So I think it's pretty important to help you like contextualize the story. I mean, sometimes if you keep it open, like how Tolkien did his, because his maps are kind of vague, which I mean it's kind of helpful in that like you just kind of make up more content as you go along.
Yeah.
But I think my all-time favorite like fantasy book map is from the Aragon series by Chris.
I have never seen this map. I'll look up the map right now and give you my first thoughts on the map. But I was gonna say, speaking of like Tolkien and stuff, and keeping it open, as a new DM, that's like one of the first things they tell you not to do. Don't make a map. Like just play the game, and things will start to fall into the places they need to be. And I'm always like, nah, fuck that. Like, I go straight to making the map because I'm like, how do all these people interact? How am I going to get people to choose the cool characters I want them to play if I can't tell them everything about the city they came from? Which is probably not great advice if you're a new DM. I'm probably not the guy to listen to, but I think you're that way as well, Luca.
I immediately made a map. It was the first thing I did.
I've made maps, but I've never. I've DM'd once, but it was a disaster. So
was it a disaster because you made a map?
No, it was a disaster because the party that was playing in my campaign just ended up killing each other.
That'll happen. That'll happen with the boys. Okay, so I'm looking at this Aragon map. I like it. It's this middle area is. Oh, that's a desert. Yeah, this is great for audio listeners, I bet. I like this map. This map does remind me of, and I wanted to bring up as well, the map from Ocarina of Time, which I've talked about plenty on this show, but I just started replaying it. And just to be honest here, I've never actually beat the game. I had the game when I was a kid, and I would get it from like the flea market, and so the game would already be beat, and there would be like a save file that I'd never delete from the previous owner of the game, so I could like go explore all of Hyrule, and like I could go fight Ganon when I wanted to, but all the dungeons were already completed and stuff. But that was sort of my experience growing up with that game. But now playing it for the first time, like I know where everything is, but re-experiencing it in like areas I can't go to yet. And I've definitely like played through the first 3 dungeons of the games like 20 times. But yeah, I don't know. Like that map is so ingrained into my head just from my childhood that like I can't imagine my enjoyment of a fantasy series or work, project, game, whatever it is, almost like it's intrinsically tied
To the
to
map.
the map. Yeah. Like I think it'd really kill my enjoyment if there wasn't a map. But I did
Yeah.
love Rage of Dragons. I didn't know there was a map, so
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like if Malazan wasn't written so like well, and if it wasn't such a good book, it'd really bother me. But it's done so well that I can forgive it.
mhm.
And my final thought on Malazan is like like the way these books have been written. It's like the whole story is feeling like one long book because of the way he writes. Like he doesn't. There's no like the jumps between perspectives just like happen. You're just like you're seeing one character, then like end of a chapter happens, the next chapter just like starts talking from the perspective of another character, and it happens like that within chapters too. And like the entire series is starting to feel like that because books have jumped from like content to content. It's all just like setting up this big finale that's going to happen. Like it feels like it's going to be like the last three books. It's going to happen like all of these like pathways converging, and it just like
it does. It feels like it sounds at least cinematic in that way. Where
I mean, yes, it is. It's very epic. Like there's a lot of like big set pieces and like action sequences that are just like so well done because all the characters from the book you've been following up until that point, like for the last like quarter of the book, is just seeing like this one event happening where that the whole book has been leading up to, and you just see all of their different pathways converging in this event. And
I'm excited
every book has been like that.
for you to tell us all about that. That sounds awesome.
Anyway, that will do it for today's episode of Luca's Litany of Literature.
No, back to your regularly scheduled program. Okay, so Matt's Monster Musings. Last week we talked about the Jinmenju tree, the tree with the fruits that had faces of humans type of thing. So that was pretty spooky. And we also talked about how there was some real world, stories about those beings or even fruit that sort of resembled the stuff of legends. And so today we're going to be talking about Dryads. So I was going to bring a question to the table here. When I say Dryad, what is your immediate visual that comes to you?
It's like a spirit that can fuse into a tree.
But yeah, what's the visual?
A wood spray, like a elf-like being, like a humanoid, pointy ears, maybe green skin, mossy coverings.
And where does your visual interpretation come from? Would you say that's from The Witcher you're pulling from, or?
Yeah, I guess like The Witcher, maybe D&D sort of, like a druid sort of feel.
Will, what about you?
Sorry, I just wanted to grab my favorite map. I was just smoothing it out. That's
No, go ahead.
this guy. Oh my god, no.
Yeah, that's okay. So for the audio listeners, Will has pulled out a map of Skyrim, and hang on a sec.
Yo, I had it framed for a while.
What's your favorite city in Skyrim?
Favorite city is
all the audio listeners. I just
honestly Whiterun. Oh my god,
Whiterun.
Yeah.
I too always have a map of Skyrim on me.
Oh, stay strapped, my god.
I stay strapped with the maps.
Man, I am the reason why they keep making Skyrim onto different, like, porting it. I have a copy on like every system.
Blame this guy.
Even though like
Skyrim Switch.
Skyrim mobile game.
Yo, for real, tried it. It was trash. Yeah.
Yeah. So Dryads.
Yes, Dryads.
Well, what comes to mind when I say Dryad? Speaking of Skyrim. But yeah, anyways, go on.
I mean, like a forest nymph, I would say. Yeah, I think place of origin, I believe, is like Greek mythology, but I would say it's found. I don't know. I mean, there's forest spirits and sprites found everywhere. I guess it's mostly in Europe.
What's the visual you get though?
It's the feminine form.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're both right, obviously. Um, so I'm holding up some miniatures right now,
Oh,
of which I painted. Here's one. This is sort of more like what you guys are talking about. I won't get the camera to focus here, but you can see the feminine form of this elf type being, but also woven into this tree. And then there's this, and this is from Skyrim. This is a Spriggan matron,
yeah,
and this is what I think of when I hear Dryad, or at least a combination of the two, which is a little bit more accurate. Um,
yeah. I think the more feminine form comes from from like Greek
it
mythology.
definitely does. There's a lot of like nymphs, as you said,
Yeah,
and they're
because
referred
there's
to in
water ones and
yeah, they're referred to in that mythology as nymphs. But they that sort of language or that title can be interchanged with Dryad when you're specifically talking about these beings in the forest. So there's a lot to sort of get through here, but they can be depicted as a tree being. So like a feminine form again, but completely covered in bark. In D&D, we know the reason for that is the spell Bark Skin, which hardens your skin in a bark-like texture. So that's a cool little throw in there. But could also be depicted as being part of a tree. So like you've probably seen in mythology, like a woman in a tree, like stuck there, which is another way. Or they can just look like a regular elf. And depending on season to season, as their hair and skin color does change season to season, they might just look like a regular elf if it's the winter, with like strange sort of white hair. But in the summer, they have green skin and green hair. In the fall, they have red or orange hair with sort of orange brown skin. Yeah, and they're never found unless they want to be found. So if you ever encounter a dryad, just be on your toes because they wanted you to find them for better or worse. We'll get into a little bit of that. So um, there's two sort of, I'm sure there's more than two, but the two I'm looking at today of their origin. So um, some people say they are lesser fey beings. Fey, if you're not familiar with the term, sort of like elvish people, but they come from a different plane of existence called the Feywild. So a lot of things fit into the category of fey, especially if we're talking D&D. But these are lesser fey spirits that get punished for falling in love with mortals, as fey are usually immortal. And because they are punished by being bonded to a tree by a greater fey, a fey lord, an arch lord, and whatever you want to call it. Or there's some people who believe a less gruesome interpretation of the origin is that they are the souls of ancient oak trees that have passed on, that are now reincarnated as this different type of being, which is pretty cool. They innately love making things look pretty, and they can even sometimes be obsessed with beauty. So there's a lot of great sort of what would you call that? A plot thread, a story hook to get your players if you're using this in a RPG game, I should say, or even to tell a story to sort of draw on. So they can only be bonded to oak trees. And so what this bond sort of looks like is, again, it can be like they're placed inside that tree. For D&D, it's a little bit different. Um, they're basically bound to the surrounding area around this tree. So they can travel outside of the tree, but if they get too far, they suffer what's called a glurgimer. I'm probably saying that wrong. Glurgimer, Glirgimer.
just
Let's
yells
try
in
some more
Welsh.
pronunciation. Glirgimer. Anyways, um, but yeah, this is the Dryad's death. It's explained as their soul, or sorry, described as their soul wasting away. Then that's either when that oak tree they're bonded to dies, or when they're too far away from the tree. So this is like another cool thing you could use in your RPG game. Say that Dryad is helping your party out, and they sort of have to like sacrifice themselves or something. That could be an emotional thread to pull on. And that area surrounding the tree is called a taril or a taril. But basically, it's an area um, that the dryad has influence over, but they can't leave that area. And so that's part of their punishment or their bond to the tree, depending on your interpretation of the origin. Um, we'll get back to that in a second. Okay, so in D&D, but also just in general mythology, they have the ability to charm people, and the charm of a dryad is super, super potent. Sort of like the Jadolgumo. Chew on that. That we talked about a couple weeks ago. They can sort of, it's less malicious than that creature's charm, in that there can actually be love between a dryad and the person they charm. But and this is a little not very politically correct. Remember, these are not my words. This is mythology. But they sort of prey on younger men who go into the forest because younger men are, as we know, less knowledgeable, less wise, and the way to save against this sort of charming is to know what it is and be intelligent enough to figure out that you're there against your will. Otherwise, it just feels like you've stumbled upon the greatest situation of your life. You live with this girl in the woods now. It's pretty sweet. You have a tree together, and they can actually have children together as well. That's another interesting thing. That the children of dryads, which I should say are always women dryads. I would never in a D&D game make a dryad a man, because then that weird predatory relationship just becomes super uncomfortable for everyone. Not that this isn't, but I don't know. I just wouldn't do it. Oh jeez. Anyways, so a man can stay there if a man's sort of intelligent and sort of has a knowledge of these beings. They may be able to shake this charm. Yeah, like Will. So if Will went into the forest and got charmed by it, it'd probably be there for like an hour or a day or two before he realized what was going on. And then he would leave
willingly.
But see, if Luca or I went, it could be months. Luca would probably be months, and I would be years or decades stuck there, just not knowing what's going on, assuming the best.
Over down bad.
Yeah. Yeah, out with the dryads, down bad. Oh man. Oh Jesus. Anyways, totally threw me off. Yeah, you basically just become a slave to this dryad. It's not like in a bad sort of back-breaking way, you know what I mean? But it's just more like you're just enthralled. Your main objective becomes staring into the eyes of this creature that you love fully. So yeah, that's how their charm works. Let's talk a little bit more about D&D. They also have the spell called Tree Stride. In mythology, this is represented as they can go inside the tree that they're bonded to if they're not actually bound inside of it. And it's not like they have a house inside that tree. They're just inside the tree. It's really weird. But in D&D, they can use the spell called Tree Stride, which lets you teleport from one tree to another. Like you open a gateway in the tree and step out of the other tree. It's a really cool spell. If you're a player, you can do this with any tree in the world as long as you've seen it. But obviously, the Dryad can only do it with trees inside her terrell. These show up in The Witcher, which I think is a really cool interpretation of them. They are not predatory in the way that the mythological ones are. They will mate, but not for pleasure. They just do it to make other dryads. If they can't make them, they'll also, like, if small girls get lost in the forest, they'll make them drink the waters of Broccolon, I think they're called, right, Luca?
Yeah.
And then that makes you lose your memory, and then you get raised with the dryads so that you become one of them eventually, and even have some physical changes like green skin. I think in the books, not in the show, they're just humans in the show, or at least look that way.
Like the ears.
Yes. And the difference, the one that stuck out to me is if the dryads in The Witcher are touched by a man without their consent, they do not hesitate to kill them instantly, and I thought that was really sweet. like just a sort of a flip from the traditional ones who are sort of seen as these weird, and like sometimes in the myth there's stories of like boys who would go into the forest to try to like sneak a peek at a changing dryad. But dryads can connect with the trees and the animals to be warned of this sort of thing happening, and this is a really cool flip of that. Like, get the fuck out of the forest. No dudes allowed. Yeah. Okay. So, as we always do in Matt's Monster Musings, we put up this week's creature against last week. So, we'll go to Luca first, and then to Will. Which would you rather encounter? I think I know your answer here, but which would you rather encounter if you were going through the forest, the Jinmenju tree or the Dryad?
I mean, honestly, I'd rather encounter a dryad. Like, there's a possibility that you don't even encounter it if it doesn't want you to see it. So
Yeah,
that's nice. And even if you do, it's probably not malevolent. Even if it does charm you, I'm like, I'm a pretty smart guy. So
yeah, not as smart as Will though.
yeah, I mean, no, who is smart as Will? Like, come on. Like, but yeah, it's nice to finally hear a non-horrifying monster from you. You know, like something that doesn't want to make me like have nightmares. I mean, I guess the menu tree is not bad, but it's still pretty horrifying. But yeah, this was refreshing. This was refreshing.
I'm glad. What about you, Will?
I'd say the Jumanji tree.
Why is that? This is gonna be good. I can feel it already.
I mean, again, if it's a tree, I could see it from a distance, and it just like obviously, I'm not going to go to the tree covered in heads or body parts.
Mm-hmm.
So I could just avoid it completely.
Right.
Even if there's mist, obviously, just don't travel through the mist.
Just don't go in the mist, man.
This guy's probably so much fun to play D&D with. No, I'm just kidding. Play D&D with Will. He's the best. Go on, though.
Yeah, but I think the Dryad could be malevolent in that, like, I mean, they could just like I guess if their charm gets on you, because like I don't think Dryads need to eat or like drink, right? So like you could just like basically be sitting there, like in like Dryad world, just like hanging out by this tree and like not moving for like days on end, and you could just like slowly waste away.
See, that's how I used in my D&D game the Jimenju tree. That you would just sit there in a fit of laughter until you died. For the Dryads, the way I used them was the forest became corrupted somehow. Whether it was like the fallen feathers of this fallen Asimar who corrupted the forest, or like there's a hag in there doing bad things, or Gulthias tree. And so the Dryads become sort of overprotective of their land and turn on like the nearby village or whatever.
Yeah, actually, the game Kingdom of Amalur is I kind of like it because I mean there's a race that are Dryads, but they're most often just called Fae.
Yeah.
And so like there's like two kinds. So there's like the summer Fae and then the winter Fae. But like they're like kind of like two sides of the same coin. Like the winter Fae, like for like all other races, can be like seen as evil, even though they're not. They're just like representative of like the more harsher parts of nature. And but they do there's like a faction that does splinter off and like basically creates like the war that is like established in like the kingdoms of Amalur. But like it's kind of cool. I like it in that I kind of like them in that version because like there are humans and there are also elves. But like humans and elves are seen as like the younger mortal races. So like elves only live for like a little bit longer compared to humans, and that's really the only difference. Whereas like Fae are like in Kingdoms of Amalur are immortal in that like when their body dies, they just like get reincarnated.
Cool.
So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, they have similar. I think this all comes from Midsummer's Night Dream, but
yeah, that version definitely more so.
Yeah, but they do have like Winter Eladrin and the Winter Court and all that stuff in D&T as well. That's cool. Yeah, I didn't know that game featured that. Okay, that'll do it for Matt's Monster Musings. Thanks for listening to me ramble there. Now let's move over to Will's Wondrous Wisdom. What do you have for us today?
So the topic is Antihero. which is I for me definitely very broad. I guess an anti-hero just depends on the interpretation of it. I mean, so like for example, like in the real world, I typed like when I was doing research, I just like typed in real world anti-heroes, and like the first one that came up, for example, was like Chelsea Manning and like Edward Snowden. Um, and so like and to me, when I was reading these names and stuff like that, it's just kind of like it just depends on like who's interpreting it.
Yeah, definitely.
Like a good example, I think, is like every like gangster ever from like the 1920s and 30s. Like obviously most of them are like did pretty bad things in terms of just like murdering people and that kind of stuff, but they're definitely more glorified like in today's world, especially. Whereas like you have like characters of like Snowden who like kind of did good things in that they were whistleblowers, but have definitely been like vilified,
Yeah.
um, especially by like larger states and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I think if you just look at like every king or like hero from history as well, they'd be like pretty. I mean, like you, like really, I guess like in their own like context, they're seen as heroes, but like maybe in like neighboring ones, maybe like anti-heroes, if not villains.
Yeah.
Um,
I think context with this topic is the most important thing, because
yeah,
anti isn't defined by like in a broad sense. It is defined based off context. There has to
yeah,
be something established for you to be anti that.
yeah, and I mean most often, I think, especially with some of the examples I gathered for like later on, are mostly driven by like personal desires.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I guess like maybe like as much as I hate to use the example, like Elon Musk, I guess in that like well maybe not so much of an anti-hero because he has a pretty large following of like fanboys and stuff, but I mean like I guess yeah, just context. I think you nailed it.
I think while you're talking about them, like most of the ones you mentioned, and not that there's an answer, but to me strike more as like villain protagonists. But then
Yeah,
like I don't know if there's any protagonists when you're talking about the history of the world and life as is, like I don't know.
it's
That's
like
like main character energy.
yeah, like it's kind of hard to like find one because I guess the way majority of people either see like I guess more characters, especially from history, are either seen as villains or heroes, right?
Mhm.
Like I don't think there's often I don't think anyone ever wants to like admit to someone being an anti-hero if they're going to make them famous. Like I guess if that makes sense, like you never want to be like or like I guess just like in general, like in history, you never want to say like, oh, this prince or queen or whatever was an anti-hero. You want to like gas them up, right?
Yeah. I One example I can think of in like mainstream media is like forgive me, but like wrestling and even like other sports. I'm not a wrestling fan. I'm gonna say that I listen to some other podcasts where they are. So this is like, but like the heel approach, even like in sports, like, let's, not to make this a sports podcast, but there are
Tom
certain
Wilson.
players that like their team fan base loves them and everybody else hates them. I would say that's sort of like an anti-hero because they play dirty or they're annoying on social media or whatever the case may be. But since they are really good, they are a hero to the people who cheer for that team or whatever.
Yeah, like it's kind of like you're good enough, even though you're shitty, that will tolerate you. I
Yeah,
guess is like the way that
yeah. Like
you
like
can
you would
look at
hate
it.
him if he didn't play on your team, but he
Yeah,
does play on your team, so you just like
yeah. Like this
that
guy
was
is
probably an elbow.
this person's kind of a dick, but whatever.
Yeah,
At least
the
they're
Matt
honest.
Kachucks and the Brad Marchands of the world for our Canadian listeners.
Yes. Yeah. I again like it's just context matters. Do you guys want to get into favorite anti-heroes or examples?
Yeah, I think that's probably do you have anything to add, Luca, to how you would define anti-hero?
Yeah, basically just somebody that has I guess for our context of like fantasy, it'd be like a protagonist or like a main character that doesn't follow the classic hero tropes, like following like a strict morality or having like a you know, for the greater good goal or something like that. Like that would essentially define something that goes anti our established like hero archetype.
Yeah, I think that's the sort of interesting, because I think you and I have not difference of opinion, but different interpretation. Because and there is too, for sure. Like the hero archetype is a human thing from our real world, right?
Mhm.
And so is all fantasy. It's all created by us humans. But for the context, again, like what we might see as an anti-hero in a certain universe is not, because
Mhm.
that's the norm. So it's
Yeah.
not anti anything. The Game of Thrones comes to mind, where everybody is a piece of shit.
Yeah.
Then it's not really an anti-hero to us as the audience. It is, because this is not typical of what we see in media, but to everyone in that universe, that's just how people are. And so I think that's an interesting sort of distinction. And then also the like the villain protagonist being someone who is the bad guy of the world, or of the story at least, but the person that we're rooting for, sort of. Also the Brad Marchands and uh, no. But yeah, so yeah, let's just get into what are you guys maybe some of your favorites, and then go ahead and do a deep dive for us on one you're particularly interested in. I'll start with you, Luca.
Okay, cool. I actually picked two that were actually done by the same author in the same world, two separate trilogies. And they're like two sort of sides of the anti-hero character, or like so one of them is Jorg Ankrath, who is the protagonist of the Broken Empire trilogy by Mark Lawrence. And he is like more of the brutal side of an anti-hero, where like his motivations are entirely self-serving. He doesn't care how he, like, for him the ends justifies the means, so he does whatever he can to achieve his goals. There's no act that is beneath him. Like, he almost falls more into the villain protagonist category rather than anti-hero. But I mean, he is an anti-hero. Like, he's the character we follow, and he's not inherently evil. He's raised in a evil sort of world. Like, just a few things to set up his character. Like, his mother and brother were brutally murdered in front of him, and he only survived because one of the house guards threw him into a bush of thorns, and like the thorns dug into his body, and like it was painful to move. So essentially he was just stuck in these thorns watching his family get butchered. And then his father essentially forgave this act, like didn't avenge his family, and essentially just signed a peace pact with the person who did it, and traded like a few like bags of gold and some horses, and called it even. So that's just like a little taste of like what he was raised in.
Wow, that sucks.
Another interesting thing is like both of these books happen in a post-apocalyptic Earth. So after humans had a nuclear apocalypse, then thousands of years later, as the survivors who survived underground for generations like started slowly coming out, then like hundreds of years passed. The Fallout.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's the world, that's the setting. But then there's Jalin Kendith, who is, they're both princes. Yeah, it's a good name. So Jalin, he is raised in the same world in the same time. But he is the other side of the anti-hero. He is like the reluctant hero. His life's goal is to live and essentially just satisfy his desires. Drink, chase women, gamble. He wants nothing more than no responsibilities and a slightly high position and nobility, so he can just do what he wants. And
the greatest type of characters.
Yep.
My favorite.
And then he's sent on this quest with like the exact opposite character of him, Snorri versus Snuggerson, a Viking warrior from the north. a man of honesty and honor, and has like a real mission, and he's forced on this quest with him because of the circumstances of book one, which I won't get into because there's just like a lot of setup. But yeah, so they're like the two sides of the same sort of archetype of character, and there's really similar characters. Like they're both princes in the same world, around the same area, like, and even there are like a few things that happen to them are very similar. Like Jalen Kenneth's mother was also murdered in front of him, and except they're like polar opposites. Like one, Jorg will do anything no matter what the cost to accomplish what he wants, whereas Jalen will do anything he can to avoid anything difficult in his life. Like his entire goal through 3 books is to just get back home and get back in bed. Like he really resonates as a character.
I think that's why though, anti-heroes, that type of like the reluctant hero, I think that's why we as like a society enjoy them so much. It's because like, yeah, I don't want to go fight orcs either. Like it sounds like it sucks. I don't want to go blow up the Death Star with you, kid. That sounds awful. That's certain death. Yeah, I think that I find like that character super present in like animes. Like the so I have an example from Naruto. Obviously, similar to yours, like the reluctant anti-hero in that sense would be like Shikamaru or Shikamaru. I'm done with pronouncing things correctly. I don't know. Where it's like a reluctant, and it is anti because everybody else in the setting is like focused on being the best they possibly can. And here's this kid who's just like, yeah, I guess I'm good at some things. Like, I don't really want to be here. I'd rather go chill with my buddies. But like, yeah, if I gotta come, I'm gonna come. And then he's really good at the stuff he does. He just doesn't enjoy doing it because, and I mean that resonates as well. I don't want to go to work and do things, even if I'm good at them. I'd rather stay at home and talk about nerdy stuff like this. But actually, go ahead, Will.
Oh, I got a whole bunch, tons.
Full.
But I'll limit it down for the purpose of this. I mean, definitely, first off, Guts from Berserk, perfect anti-hero. I mean, to start it off, I guess all of mine are more so like products of their environment, I guess. But I guess that's with every one. Next one is Spawn, probably like one of my favorite like comic book heroes of all time. Definitely anti-hero, I guess. It's kind of like Batman, but he just like either just kills people or just like outright just like sends them straight to hell.
Yeah, I think that is a big part of it too. He's not blessed by a god or
no, and like there's other
he's
like
literally cursed by the devil to return. Yeah.
And like most of his allies, like other Hellspawn, like people from history who've made their way into similar situations, like for example, like his mentor, if you will, is like was a Hellspawn, but he managed to get like out of his like contract with the devil, but instead it's kind of cool because like this dude is like trapped between living and like dying in like heaven and hell because like heaven doesn't want him because he was like a part of hell, like he was like an officer in the devil's army, but also like hell doesn't want him because he basically just like weaseled his way out of the contract.
Yeah.
So like the entire universe is like super gray, which I think I definitely like it, even though I usually hate like dark context just for the sake of being dark. Next one is definitely Urdnot Rex from Mass Effect. Look, he starts off mostly as an anti-hero. I think by the last game, the third one, he is the protagonist, but he's a part of like the Krogan species / race, I guess, of aliens who had like earlier on before humans made contact with like the rest of the other alien races and stuff like in the galaxy. They were like the Krogans were used as like I guess tools of war because I mean if you just like Google them, they just look like a cross between a rhino and a frog. Like super like warlike, kind of just like space Vikings, but like they also like reproduce super fast. But And for that, like the other races, like introduce this thing called the genophage, which basically like makes like Krogan fertility rates only like 1 out of 1 million, like Krogan infants survive. So when
Wow.
like the main character meets or not Rex, he's like a mercenary slash like I guess like part of like a leader. Like he's like next in line for his clan kind of thing, but he doesn't really care. Like outside of like basically getting rid of the genophage and just like killing. Um and like there's multiple instances, especially in the first Mass Effect, where he's basically like, um I wouldn't so there's like the example of like there's like this arachnid race that like the player's confronted with either like destroying or like letting loose upon the galaxy, and like you get that option after you find out that they're sentient. So
Oh
like
wow.
or not Rex is just like, I wouldn't do it because we're just gonna, he's like, everyone's just gonna get the Krogans to go and like kill them all again. um so like he's definitely an anti-hero, but like by the third game he's like, I don't want to say more matured, but like I guess his values aligned more so with like saving the universe with everyone, or the galaxy I should say. um Next one is definitely Jamie Lannister, probably one of my favorite literary characters. Um,
That's
I
a
mean,
hot take.
I mean, in the show,
Yeah.
they did him
No, I
dirty.
know.
They did him super dirty. Um,
Oh, okay, okay. So you prefer his
yeah,
story in the books, his unfinished story, that is.
yeah, because like he's not a character until the third book, I believe,
Oh,
like a
really?
POV character. I
Who
mean, it's
pushes
like,
Bran out the window?
yeah, like he's like talked about, but like none of the
Oh.
chapters are from his perspective. Um, so like in the
Oh.
obviously like in the first two books, which also coincides with the first two seasons of the show, like definitely public enemy number one pushes a kid out the window and cripples him, and like basically like kills a bunch of like Stark soldiers and stuff like that. And like, yeah, I don't know. But then like, but in the books, it's really, they do it better in the show in that like, um after he loses his hand, like he, it definitely like humbles him and like changes his character. Um, so like in the show, for example, like he's always like, got to do this for my family, but actually like in the books, he's ordered by Tywin to basically leave the Kingsguard and basically like become the Lannister, even though like Kingsguard vows are like for life. But like in the books, like Jamie actually like refuses it, and he's like, no, I'm not a Lannister. I'm a part of the Kingsguard. So like he kind of like chooses like he wants to be like a knight,
Yeah.
and like maybe not so much like respected, but like kind of like wants to live up to that status. So like he's definitely like, his like POV sections in like especially the fourth and fifth book are like, he definitely like tries to like end like conflicts like without like bloodshed. So like for example, like he gets sent off to like lay siege to like River Run and like a bunch of other places that were like held by Stark forces that were kind of like falling apart, and he's like, he always like tries to like negotiate with them and stuff, like knowing full well that he could like totally wipe out like his castle and stuff.
See, there's just I don't think I ever rooted for Jamie Lannister. I've only watched the show, but
Yeah, yeah, no, the
um,
show they did it like, I mean the casting, I think they did a good job, but like, yeah, he's kind of like shitty in the show for most of it.
yeah,
Or
and his brief redemption is definitely
questionable.
it's questionable, but then it's also spoilers for Game of Thrones. It's
The ending,
definitely,
man.
he goes back on the good things he does by, well, I mean, like he didn't do anything bad when he went back, but it was more so that he went back and chose sort of death. Um,
Yeah.
that wasn't his goal, but that's sort of his
Yeah.
fatal flaw, is that he can't, shake the love for Cersei.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, man. I was so disappointed with that arc. Like, I think that was the one thing that like broke me for season 8. Like
Wow.
everything else, like I did not really care as much. But then I was like, man, what the like?
We have to do a whole podcast
Yeah,
episode
let's not
just
get into
ranting
season 8 right now
yeah.
because
Oh man, it's gonna be so good. But okay, staying with Antiheroes.
But
You
yeah,
have any
yeah.
more, Will?
I mean, just to add with Jamie, like again, he has like that reputation, and like he is still kind of a little bit more callous, and like in his like Kingsguard duties, like he becomes like more, like I guess he gets more strict with the Kingsguard vows and stuff like that. Like he basically like in the books he like pushes off Cersei, and he's like, we're not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Like he totally like removes himself from everyone, and like I think he like grows like a beard and shaves his head and becomes Kratos pretty much.
Wow. Kratos is another great anti-hero.
Yeah, that's why I set it up. Run with it.
Set me up and I spike it down. I think Kratos is pretty good as well.
Saw you on the one timer. Let's go.
Yeah. But yeah, you know what? You guys know this. I haven't played the first three God of War games, so I think one of you could probably speak more to, because by the time I meet Kratos in God of War 4 or God of War, he's less of an anti-hero now and more just a dude. But yeah, go ahead, Luca, if you got something on Kratos.
Oh yeah, I mean Kratos, like I don't know if you could even call him a hero per se. Like he's mad as on like he has a list, like a murder list to get through, and just anybody who tries to stop him, he just rips their head off.
It's not even especially men that have wronged him, it's gods.
Yeah.
I mean,
gods, some of which were not involved at all.
Yeah, like he kills like Athena and stuff, like the goddess of wisdom. Like he's I mean he's obviously a great character and it's fun, but
yeah,
his goal is just murder.
He reminds me a lot of Guts from Berserk. Obviously not like on a grander scale as Kratos, but I think Guts and Kratos are similar in that like definitely driven with like one personal goal. I mean, even in the fourth game, that goal is like getting to the top of the highest peak in all the realms, and whatever else happens along the way happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like, I would say almost in the first three, he's probably more of the villain protagonist, literally bringing about the end of the world by the end of it.
He executes a whole pantheon of
yeah,
like millions of people worship
guy.
like
as a Kratos apologist.
Like what he kills Poseidon, he creates like a tsunami that probably wipes out hundreds of thousands of people.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember, like I don't remember specifically, but what did Poseidon even do to him? Like I'm pretty sure he was only mad at Zeus. Like
got in the way, man.
Exactly.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah, so maybe more of a villain protagonist.
He kills some titans, he kills Gaia. This man's a murderer.
So a question for you then, Will. I'll have the same question for you, Luca, based off the ones you brought, and then I'll bring up one more. Do you think your characters are anti-heroes in that they are anti of the established world, or are they anti-heroes just to us, the audience?
I think for like Jamie Lannister, it would go with the latter. Because again, like the first two books, like absolute douchebag, but then like later on, like again by books like 3, 4, and 5, he's like, well, mostly 4, not really 5. I don't think he's in 5 because 4 and 5 happen at the same time ish. But I mean, like you kind of find out like maybe not his motivations and stuff like that, but or more so his motivations change, and like he still kind of is like callous because I mean he is technically like the greatest fighter in the world. So and like he definitely knows it, but he basically shows like more restraint and like again just changes his personality. I guess matures in a way. But like the other ones, I think are more so the first option that you mentioned, which I've already forgotten.
Yeah, but which was more so in the context of the world opposed to our world.
Yeah, I mean Spawn would be a good example. The same, and also or not Rex, or like they're kind of anti-heroes because they don't really have another option, I guess in a way. Because like with like Rex, he's more so like there's not that many Krobians left in the galaxy, so he's like kind of does what he has to do to survive. And yeah, or I guess maybe with Rex, it's more so anti-hero to us, but I think Spawn definitely, because I mean he's does whatever he could do to punish people.
What about you, Luca?
Um, for the two examples I brought, like Jorg Ankrath, I think in the context of his world, he's almost considered a villain. Like
Right.
most people consider him a villain. Even he leads some people. Even the people that follow him, I don't think they consider him a hero. So he would be like anti norms and establishments in our world and in his own world.
Yeah, definitely can be both for sure.
This man is a villain.
Yeah.
but you still want him to win. Like, it's actually it's debatable. He's a pretty messed up guy, but he is the
But you
protagonist.
understand why, and so
Yeah,
that
like,
makes it a sympathetic character.
Yeah, especially because they're both written in first person, so it's always his perspective you're getting.
Oh, I see.
And even he doesn't consider himself like a hero or something. He knows that what he's doing is reprehensible, but it is what it is. Whereas Jalin, I would say he could almost be even considered an anti-hero in his own world, like going against like the norms of having to work hard to get to a position of success, because he was born a prince and he's trying to levy that into any kind of like easy life he can. Again, I don't think anybody in his world even consider him a hero. Like, I mean, they would because of what happens in the book, but like once you meet him, he's done nothing worthy of. Oh, wait, sorry, no, that's a lie. There is like an interesting character trait with him. He is afflicted with what he calls is an affliction of battle madness. There's a few instances in the story where he is forced to fight, and when he is forced to fight, sort of his fear of death sort of like takes over, and like he's actually very skilled with the sword because of all the training he was forced to do as a child. So like it's sort of like his fear of death and like the madness of not wanting to die sort of takes over his like normal cowardice, and he becomes essentially like a berserker type character on a battlefield. And he did have one instance where he was forced into war prior to the events of book one, where he like went on this mad rampage, which he barely remembers. He essentially just wanted to survive, but the people around him essentially considered him like the people he fought against considered him like a devil, and the people he fought with considered him a hero of that battle.
Cool.
But for him, it was just like trying to escape and try to get back to back to his life.
Okay, and so my last example is Sasuke from Naruto. If you want to hear more about Naruto, I'm gonna have a special guest on the Unabashed show this Friday, going in depth on Naruto. But Sasuke, okay, anti because he's that roguish bad boy type character that you see often in anime, but also anti because he's anti everything protagonist in our story with similar end goals. So he's not the villain or the antagonist. Sort of becomes a little bit towards the end, but throughout the show, he's more so an anti-hero because we don't want him to lose. He's trying to avenge his family, as these fantasy characters often are. And he finds out most of his life he's been lied to about why what happened to them, which is brutal. And if you're at all familiar with Naruto, you know what I'm talking about. And so I'll just avoid spoilers a little bit here. If you want all those spoilers, come watch on Friday. Yeah, so he's going through his life in this way, and we can feel the anger and we can understand it, but it's just that he's approaching things from the wrong way. And so instead of embracing the community the way that we see Naruto do, Naruto is forgiving in nature. And so instead of holding it against everybody for outcasting him, essentially, he lets them in and they build together. Whereas Sasuke's immediate reaction is to reject community influence and go seek power of his own through people who are outcasted. And so that's one example. And he believes the only way to save the world is to destroy it and rebuild it. So he's trying to end ninja fully, whereas Naruto believes through communication and cooperation that they can like reforge the world, and that there doesn't have to be this cycle of violence and death. And so that's how he's sort of the antithesis of Naruto, but not in a way that makes him the antagonist. Because we see like his fight is still for the living. He just doesn't want people to suffer the way he had to suffer. And so he believes that everything has to go. And as the audience, we don't blame him for that, because if I was in his shoes, I would also feel that way. When he gets a little bit of closure with what happened to his family, it's immediately taken away by himself, because he learns this a little bit too late. And it sucks. It's one of the worst moments in anime, that him sort of waking up with the revelation that now his last surviving family, sorry, spoilers, is now dead. Super sad stuff. You guys are both familiar with Naruto, I think.
I am, yes.
So how do you feel about Sasuke?
I like Sasuke. I'm not like super, I haven't seen all of it, but like I have played a few of the games and I've heard all the story pretty much. And I've seen the like early seasons.
Mm-hmm.
Sasuke as a child.
Yeah. Will, what do you think?
I'm not a fan.
Oh, wow. And why is that?
Another hot take.
I don't think that's a hot take.
I'll be honest with you. I just found his character to be kind of insufferable. That's a hot take.
No, I find this really, maybe it's a hot take, but I find it interesting because it's often the other way around, where people find Naruto insufferable. I'm interested.
For me, like my favorite characters aren't the main characters, I guess. So for me, like there's like I've seen most of it, right? And maybe on Friday you can chat. You could bring up that anecdote of my situation earlier this year when I fell asleep while it was playing on the TV. And
no, you can tell that story here. That's probably not related to the guest's love of Naruto.
I mean, same subject. Side note, I had it just like on the TV, like when I was preparing for final exams, and I just fell asleep on the couch, like studying and stuff, and it was playing, and then several of my neighbors complained. 4 a.m. hearing about the English dub version of people screaming out that anyone who abandons their comrades are scum and other cringe English dub lines. But I don't know. I just found Sasuke to be, I don't know, like the.
Do you blame Sasuke for your noise complaints?
Yeah. I mean, there was times where like I would just like skip his arcs and episodes.
Wow.
Yeah, because I was just like, man, like.
But is that because you, like, sort of what I'm saying is that his motives are like you're frustrated sort of watching him, just like, yo, dude, you're doing this the wrong way type of thing?
Yeah, and just his personality. I just found him to be kind of cringy.
See, I always look at his personality as a facade. Like, I don't think he actually believes any of that stuff. Like, when he has that confrontation with Naruto, where like the final valley fight, the first one, I've always seen that as like, he didn't mean anything he said. He's telling himself that in hopes that he'll believe it himself. Saying things like, I have to kill you because you're my best friend, and that's the only thing that'll make me strong is I have to be, ridiculous stuff like that. I think he's trying to model himself off of his older brother who did that terrible thing.
Like trying to like convince himself how to do it.
But for me, and ever since that, obviously he's like an anime character, so like they play up the edginess as like, that personality, but
yeah, I mean, that's why I usually just skip. And also, I just found his arc to be like pretty slow. So, I don't know. Again, like I like the side characters more than the main.
Who's your favorite? Just curious.
Well, I guess maybe not so much Aside, but definitely like Kakashi, and then definitely Asuma is my favorite. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, smoking kills, but
he didn't. Okay.
can I before we wrap up ish? Can I add two more?
Yeah, absolutely. And feel
Godzilla.
free as well, Luca.
Godzilla for sure is an anti-hero.
That's
Zilla
a
gang
good,
for
yeah.
I mean
That's funny.
maybe just don't build your buildings there. Um, don't put a skyscraper in our spicy iguana's way. Um,
Spicy iguana.
the second one is definitely my favorite from video games, which would be Jin Sakai from Ghost of Tsushima.
Hmm.
Definitely. I'm
Been
not even
playing
going
a
to
lot
say
of
that
that.
more, other than he just does what he has to do. But definitely, like, probably, I would say probably like top five of this generation for video games.
Deal.
I would agree.
Hell yeah.
Any other honorable mentions, Luca?
Yeah, I have. There's Ozymandias
Oh,
from.
I wouldn't even anti-hero. Like I
I
know I
mean,
was
from the
all
perspective of the
last
world,
episodes,
like,
but yeah,
he's definitely like the villain. He's clearly the villain of Watchmen, but like from some people's perspective, he saved the world. Um,
His
I said what
perspective.
I said, and I won't take it back.
uh, and there is from Malazan, there's Animander Rake, who is like one of those beings that's been alive for like hundreds of thousands of years, and he's
He's the
always
guy with
like,
the sword, right?
yeah, he's the guy with Dragnipur, the
Yeah.
soul-stealing sword. Yeah, so he's always like his motivations are always unknown, and but oftentimes what he does is like ends up being for the good of the world, especially in like book 4, for example, where he was like integral in saving the world, even though his real motivation is sort of gray, like you don't really know what it is.
Mhm.
um but yeah, he's a one of those just out and about anti-heroes in the world, not a main character.
A few honorable mentions for me. V from V for Vendetta. Um, Definitely an anti-hero. More so in a real world context because he's a
Hmm.
murderer and but I maybe even not because he's like just anti-fascist vigilante justice. But he also puts Evie through the same torture he went through just cuz. Um like it's, it's kind of fucked. But yeah. Um then I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about all the superhero ones like Deadpool or even like the
Wolverine.
Punisher. Sorry, what was that, Luca?
Wolverine.
Wolverine, definitely. More so an anti-hero than anything else. Like
Hellboy.
Hellboy,
Uh,
anti-hero for sure. Um, but yeah, I think maybe Punisher's more like villain protagonist, but then like are the good guys the mobsters he's getting revenge on? No. So definitely an anti-hero, but like one of the more brutal ones.
yeah.
Deadpool because he's a dickhead and murders people. Um yeah, Rorschach, anti-hero because in stopping criminals he becomes one himself,
Hmm.
does really messed up things. Yeah, I think what I'm learning from this is a lot of anti-heroes come as trauma response.
Yeah.
Um, Terrible things happen to people and they respond in terrible ways, even if their motives are pure or, noble. Yeah. Do you have anything else for us there, Will?
Um, I think in terms of use in fantasy, um, I mean, if you're doing like D&D, for example, I think it's just you can add anti-heroes to spicing up the party. Um,
Yeah.
I mean, that way you're not stuck with these like, I guess like two-dimensional characters or like flat characters where it's either just good or evil kind of thing. But I think I think a more effective way to use them is to have them like have characters slowly turn into an anti-hero. So like for example, if you have like the golden boy who eventually like takes things too far and kills people and stuff like that, I think that's a good use for it. But I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think
I wouldn't use too many. I would keep I would keep anti-hero numbers low in a fantasy setting.
I agree. I think for D&D, it's definitely that they're more so anti-heroes in a real world context because you're real people playing the game.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on how immersive your game is, I guess, but
Yeah.
definitely like the table would be like, oh, that's sort of messed up and out of character. I like the anti-hero arc you could do with the character. So maybe like, as one sort of event plays out or a couple sessions in a row, you take this sort of darker path because I don't know, you're dealing with some stuff. Your character's dealing with some stuff.
My character's healing techniques.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Luca, in terms of application in fantasy or importance to fantasy or RPG games?
Yeah, I think like in RPG games, I feel like oftentimes the player characters end up being anti-heroes. I mean, I don't know if I'd call Kato a hero or even Kato's the character I played in Matt's D&D campaign.
Right.
I don't I'd almost call him like a villain hero sometimes, like a villain protagonist. Like yeah, I've done some evil things
I think
in your world.
based off the
Not to
character,
good people, but yeah.
yeah. But based off the character's origin, having a lack of moral code makes sense. Pardon me. Based off where they grew up and stuff. So I just always saw him as someone who didn't have a moral compass, and just did things to get the next thing done type of thing.
But I feel like a lot of even like the players we've had in my campaign and in your campaign, like a lot of them take that anti-hero sort of archetype where they sort of do whatever it takes to get to their goals.
Yeah, yeah.
I've seen that behavior pretty consistently.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes I just think people are having bad days when you play D&D and they show up and they're like, I'm trying to fuck shit up because this is not real.
Fireball.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes you just gotta get chaotic.
So like, because like I haven't really been into D&D or like at least campaigns as much as you guys, but it's kind of like funny because like when I usually play like RPGs, for example, I always choose like the good route, which is
yeah.
Like there's been times where like, for example, like with The Witcher 3, like on my replay, because I didn't know that certain dialogue options can like impact the ending at the time. Like I like pretty much replayed it to get the good ending, which is actually, you know what, a good anti-hero would be Geralt.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we totally glossed over that one. Yeah, but maybe it's because I'm an anti-hero in real life.
I think that's interesting, and I like sort of this vein of conversation, but I think more people fall closer to anti-hero or at least reluctant hero than they do goody two shoes.
Lazy and angry.
There's definitely more Deadpools in our universe than there are Superman,
Yeah.
or Captain America.
True. But like, yeah,
excuse me.
I don't know, because even the majority of like my favorite hero, like for example, like Superman is like one of my favorite comic book heroes. So, I mean, aside from like Spawn and Hellboy, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, anything else on anti-heroes?
King Kong.
Yeah.
King Kong.
I don't know if King Kong's yeah, I don't know. Maybe. Depending on the movie, I guess.
True.
The original, probably not, but King Kong versus Godzilla, I would say probably.
Did you guys see that?
No.
Honestly, it took me like 4 times to like watch like King of Monsters or whatever, like the one prior to the one that just released, because like it was horrible.
Yeah, I watched the pitch meeting guy do a video on it. Another Canadian content creator. Shout out to
I think that'll do it for our conversation on anti-heroes. Again, if you didn't know, this Friday there's an episode of Unabashed. Check out our episode of Ruminations that just came out last Friday. And yeah, As always, I am Matt.
Luca.
And I'm Will.
We are the legend.
But what about Riddick? Or let's see more. Man with no name.
Keep going.
Majority of the characters from Metal Gear. Dread, maybe. Eric Killmonger.
Yeah, I wanted to bring that one up. It feels almost more like antagonist.
Yeah, I think maybe. I don't know. To me, yeah, I don't know. Venom.
I'm just gonna have the music playing over this.